Alright, so welcome back. So today we're going to go to our main game menu here, and if we go to the settings panel, it's going to remember if we want the sound on or off. So let's say we want the sound on. If we then quit out of the game and come back to it, it will remember what setting we had for that value. This is going to be using a config file. We'll talk about saving using a custom binary for actual game progress in the next episode. So let's jump right in. Okay, so today we're going to start talking about two big ideas in any kind of game development. We're going to talk about singleton objects that are going to exist between scenes. In Godot, we do that using what's called a global or a preload. I've seen it called both, but I think global is the correct one, but preload is what you set it to. Anyway, we're going to talk about using globals and preloaded values and scripts. And then we're also going to talk today about using a config file to save player preferences. Now, next, we're going to talk about using a custom binary file to store more data than just that. The config file is small and it's relatively unsecure, and it's really only supposed to be used for saving any kind of player configurations that they'd want to save, such as whether or not there's music playing, whether or not there's sound playing, the level of the volume, things like that. Now, the other kind of file, the custom binary file, and there's a lot of different ways that you can go about saving stuff in Godot. The custom binary file that we're going to create is a bit more secure, but it's still not super secure. The most secure way would be to make like a, you can do an encrypted file using Godot, using what's called a byte pool array, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to do the config file and then the custom binary. So very first thing we need to do actually is open up the script window. From here we're going to create a new script that's not going to be attached to anything. So I'm going to go to File, choose New, and this is going to be GD script. It's only going to inherit from Node. My path is going to be in my scripts folder, and I'm going to call this config manager. So I'm going to do config manager, and then we'll save this, and this will open up a new script which just extends from Node. Now, before I go any further, I want to add this into the preloads. To do that, I'm going to go to Project Settings, Autoload, and it needs to know what it's going to autoload. So I'm going to go to my config manager script I just made, and then click Add. And then that'll add that as something that it autoloads. This would be good for like a music manager. So when we get to sound, we're going to be mostly doing that as a preload as well, or autoload. So we'll close from there. Now, what I want to do here is I want to declare a path for where I want to have the config file stored. I want to set up two variables for sound, or one for sound and one for music. So let's make a path for where we're going to save our file. So by default, the path where files get saved is user. It's slightly different for each operating system, but if you just use user, Godot should know where it's going on each operating system. So let's make an onReady var that I'm going to call path, and this is going to be equal to, in quotations, user colon backslash backslash or forward slash config.ini, which is I'm just creating that file right now, and I'm calling it config. I'm going to make two new variables. So var sound on equals true, and var music on equals true. So I'm going to default those to true. Now I'm going to create two functions here, one to save the config file and one to load the config file. And when we load it, we want to take into account the fact that there might not be a config file. And so if there isn't one, then we're going to load some default options. So first thing I'm going to do is make a function called save config. And there's a few things I'm going to do here. So first I'm going to create a new variable, which is the config file itself. So I'm going to call this var config is equal to config file.new. This is a a class that comes in Godot, config file.new, creates a new configuration file. I'm going to say that I'm going to set the value because this is going to be saving. So I'm going to say config.set, which is going to set a value, and I'm going to set the value of sound to be whatever the value of sound on is. I'm going to do the same thing for music. Config.set value, music, and you can call these variables whatever you want to. They're just going to get set in the config file. And now when you read from the config file, you want to make sure that you're reading correctly, that you're reading the right variable. And so it's important that you are consistent with your names of whatever variables you're setting here. Now we're going to do something to catch an error. So we're going to say var error is equal to config.save from the path. So essentially we're telling our config file to save to that path, and if there's an error, we're going to catch it. And so we're going to say if error is not equal to OK, meaning if there's an error, then I'm going to print something went wrong. Okay, so now I'm going to create another function to load the config file. So function load config, and this is going to do something very similar. It's going to create a new config variable. Var config equals config file.new. And then I'm going to set some default options. So I'm going to say my default options are equal to, and I actually just read on the Godot style guide that in GDScript, when you're continuing a line like this, it's supposed to be double indented, not just one indentation, which I thought was interesting. Anyway, I'm going to set sound to be true. This is creating something called a dictionary, which we're going to talk about more next episode. So by default, we want both sound and music to be on. And there should be a comma between these entries. A dictionary is a type of data structure that rather than just having a true or false, it has a key and a value. And that value can be even an array, but you have a key, which is this right here, sound. And the key doesn't have to be a string. It could be an integer. And then values that are associated with that key. And those can be dynamically read and changed from a dictionary. So it's kind of interesting. So we're going to set sound to be true and music to be true. And we're going to make an error. Config.load. And if error is not equal to OK, then that's what those default options are going to be. Return default options. That's not how you spell return. All right. And then if it's not OK, then we're going to say that options, or default options rather. No, we'll call it options. Is equal to an empty dictionary, and then we'll add some values to it. Options.sound is equal to config.get the value from the sound, and options.music is equal to config.get value music. And then we're going to return those options. Return options. All right, so save config takes whatever the current configuration of these two variables are, and since this is global, it's going to exist in every scene. Just the save config is going to take whatever variables these are set to and add them to the config file. Load config then is going to check to see if there is a current config file. If there is, then it's going to load in the value of sound and music. If there's not, then it's going to set sound and music to be equal to the default options. And now we can manipulate this from other scripts or objects since this is global. So now what I want to do is in the ready function here, I want to load config. Even though this returns something, if I just load it, it'll be fine because part of the loading was to set those values. All right, so let's take a look here at how we're going to implement this. So I'm going to save this. Let's go to distraction-free mode here, and let's go to our scenes. I want to take a look at my main game scene, the main scene that you would see when you open the game. So there's the main menu panel. What did I call it? I'm dumb sometimes. Settings panel. This is main menu panel. Yep, that's not what I want. This is riveting YouTube content, I know. Game window, game windscreen. There we go, game menu. All right, so just to remind you how this works, if I play this scene, my game menu, this slides in, I have the option to go to settings, and this button doesn't do anything. So we're gonna actually make this turn on and off, and also access the global and change its value. So we need to take a look at the settings panel here. And in the settings panel, I've got my buttons, button 1, which is the music button. Now, I'm going to go to my script, and if button 1, I'm going to emit a signal to sound change. Oh wow, I already, Sometimes I do things intelligently, and it always shocks and surprises me. So that sound change signal, I'm going to have that go to the game menu here. So settings, I'm going to go to node, sound change, connect to the game menu. And then in the game menu, I'm going to say that my, so I'm going to say var current sound is equal to config manager dot sound on, and then I'm going to say, actually I don't need to do that, I can just say config manager dot sound on is equal to the opposite of config manager dot sound on, which is going to change it from true to false or from false to true. And then in the settings panel here, let's look at this. So I'm going to add 2 textures. So texture sound on, texture sound off. And let's, oh, duh, good lord, I'm not in C#. Export of type texture sound var sound on, and then export of type texture var sound off. Now I'm also going to keep track here of whether the sound is on or off. So let's say var sound on. Ready. We want to say sound on is equal to config file dot sound, or not config file, config manager dot sound on. All right, and then, oh, this needs to be a function. Good lord. Okay. All right, now I also, let's get rid of this pass here, and this one too. So when we're emitting the signal to sound change, we're going to say sound on is equal to not sound on. If sound on is true, else So if sound on is true, then we want to change the texture. This should be double equals. Now the texture here for the settings panel is button 1. So let's go back up here. We're going to say we want buttons, nope, not button 2, button 1. Dot texture is equal to sound on. And then we can get rid of this pass here. And let's copy that, paste it there, and then equal to sound off. All right, cool, let's save that. Let's pop out of distraction free mode here. Let's go to the settings, which needs to have 2 textures. So we'll go to Art, UI. Oh, it's not in my UI folder. It's just in the Art folder? Yeah, it's just in the Art folder. All right, so sound on button, sound off button. And then in here, I also want to read that on ready. So in the ready, sound on is equal to config manager dot sound on. So let's actually make this a function. Let's call this function change sound texture. So I don't have, I'm making this a function so I don't have to do it more than, I don't have to type all that stuff out more than once. Programmers like mathematicians are lazy if they're anything. So come on now, go back over. There we go. So we're also going to change sound texture. And then when we're on ready, change sound texture. Okay, cool. So that should actually work, but I haven't tested this. I did it differently on my own. So we'll see if this works. All right, we're going to play this scene. Sound on already exists in parent class. Oh, because I called these both. Okay. So we'll call this, instead of sound on, we'll call this, I don't know, sound holder. And then this is going to be holder, holder. Okay. And this is holder. And this is holder. Okay. So let's go out of distraction free mode here. Let's try this again. Okay, so sorry for that weird cut. So the one thing that we want to do too is after we, so first of all, I have an error here as far as my order of operations goes. And I don't need this sound holder variable either. And I shouldn't be doing this in ready. So let's get rid of that. And let's get rid of the sound holder variable. So what I should do here, instead of saying sound holder is equal to not sound holder, is I should say config manager dot sound on is equal to not config manager dot sound on. And then this is just going to cut out that whole sound change that we're doing from the settings panel that we don't need to do from there. And then we're going to change the texture. And then instead of checking to see if sound holder is true, we're going to check to see if config manager dot sound on is true. The other thing we need to do is make sure that we're saving our config file. So config manager dot save config. All right, now to make it so that we're not reading that directly from ready, that we're instead reading it when the panel opens, I'm going to go to game menu here. And I did this when the video was paused and forgot I did it when the video was paused. I'm going to add a new signal to it. And the signal is going to be just for reading the sound. So read the sound value. So that's the signal I added. And then in node, with game menu highlighted, I'm going to connect read sound to settings. And then when we read the sound, I want to change sound texture. Let's save that. All right, so now let's give this a try. Let's hit play. Okay, set value expects 3 arguments. Okay, hold on one sec. Okay, so when I set the value, I forgot that we need three things. We need to know the section, the key, and then the value. So the section is going to be audio for both of these. So cool. We're going to save that, and then let's retry. All right, settings. Cool. Now it should have saved. And let's retry here. Expected 2 arguments. Oh, yeah. So we want to get audio sound, and we want to get audio music. All right, cool. So you can tell this is something I'm not as well versed with. Settings here. Okay. And then why is it not doing that? So we've got load config, return options, options.sound. Okay, sorry for that weird cut. So then when I'm saving it, I want to make sure that I have the 3 things. So it's directory and then key and then value, instead of just key value like it is with a dictionary. And then in my load config, I want to do options.sound. I don't want this to be options.sound. I want this to be, because I don't really need to return options. I'm going to change this a little bit from what my notes are, because this is actually going to be better. I'm going to say sound on is equal to, and then music on is equal to. And then I need to do the same thing, so like directory, audio, sound, and then you can pass in a third argument, which is a default argument. And my default argument is going to be default options.sound. I'm going to do the same thing for music. We're going to be in the audio section, the music key, and then the default value is default options.music. And then still return options, just in case I want to do something with that later. So, all right, cool. So we're setting it now in the settings panel. This has been a mess of an episode. I'm sorry, guys. In the settings panel, we're going to do change sound texture, config manager.sound on, which I just set. So this should be good. Let's try it now. So if we hit play, if we go to settings, okay, cool. It read it correctly. So let's turn it on now. Let's go back and let's try this now. It should read it as being on. Sweet. Off. Go back. And it should read it as being off. Just check one more time. I want to see it. Great. Now when we add the sound manager is going to be taking information directly from the configs file as to whether or not it plays with volume. And so when you press this button, the volume is going to go off. When you unpress it, the volume comes back on. That's essentially how we're going to be setting it up. So this is one way to save data. Now, the next way we're going to save data in the next episode is by using a custom binary file. And we're going to use that to save what level we've cleared, how many stars we got on it, and I think there's 1 or 2 other things I want to save. So, yeah, there we go. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments down below. Otherwise, you can follow me on Discord, or you can join the Discord, find people who are talking about things that they've done to extend this, or you can follow me on Twitter to find out when I post new videos. So, yeah, I hope everybody out there has themselves a wonderful day. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving a like, subscribing to the channel, or telling a friend who might be interested. Also, please consider following me on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can earn access to tangible rewards, like early access to videos, backer-only videos and series, polls for future topics, streams, and even individual tutoring sessions. You can find a link to that in the description. And as always, have yourselves a wonderful day.